Okay, so the Liberals plan, they want to double new home construction with their Build Canada Homes initiative. What are your thoughts on that?
How do you think the party promises could actually play out in markets like ours, here in Sudbury and in Northern Ontario?
Let's say you're a voter who's passionate about housing and housing affordability. What should you be looking at when reviewing these platforms? Welcome to the T&T Real Estate Podcast, where we spark conversations that set you up for real estate success. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Tanya, and each week we bring you expert tips on navigating Northern Ontario's real estate market. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, we've got the tools to help you thrive. Okay, so it is spring 2025, and we have a big monumental event around the corner, something that happens only once every 4 years, and that is our federal election. And we have various parties with various platforms, but when it comes to housing, that's where we like to dig really deep and look at what the parties have to say for platforms. So Tyler, we've done a lot of research here. We've been talking about it a lot at the office lately. What are some of the differences that you would sort of point out in terms of the various party platforms?
Okay, so each platform, whether it's NDP, Liberal, Conservative, they all have their various platforms. So, and they're all very extensive. So we kind of took out the key points that we think, obviously kind of stick into the housing topic as well, but we took out the key kind of takeaways that we think are kind of going to be beneficial for the everyday consumer if they actually come to a head or fruition, right? So the biggest one would be removing sales taxes on new homes. The Liberals want to do that up to $1 million and only for first-time home buyers. The Conservatives, a day later said, okay, we're going to do $1.3 million and it's going to be for everybody. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a first-time home buyer that gets that tax cut. Which is, I think it could be beneficial, but obviously we'll get into that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. All three parties have talked about streamlining permitting process. Obviously, we're not building enough homes in Ontario or Canada, like Canada-wide. We're just not building enough homes for the people that are coming in. And I think that's huge, obviously a huge topic in this election. And that's what they're talking about right now. So whether it's NDP, Liberal, Conservative, they're all talking about how to streamline these processes. And it's really about, simplifying, legislation, making obviously the ADU that we are going to talk about a little bit later.
I think skilled labor was another thing that a couple of the parties touched on, increasing the skilled labor force for house building, increasing the amount of people in trades. But it's not something that all the parties have talked about. Certainly the Conservatives were talking about an apprenticeship, I believe, grant for accessibility. And then the NDP was looking at training, 100,000 people to train into the trades?
Yeah, so the NDP want 100,000 new skilled workers. Conservatives top them obviously at $350,000, and then the $4,000 kind of grant to get started in their schooling. The last one I would touch on, and obviously we'll go through, there's plenty more, would be all the federal lands. And so the Conservatives want to sell off 15% of their buildings, which is actually 6,000 buildings.
Oh, wow.
I going through and kind of doing that research, I had no idea that they own that many. I would have thought it would be a lot less than that, but so 6,000 sales obviously within their term, so probably 4 years, and then they want to sell thousands of acres to redevelop. The Liberals are taking a little bit of a different stance. They want to sell off the lands or use the lands for redevelopment, but put obviously affordable homes on there as well. So
using those public lands for affordable housing.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay, so one of the big topics is the taxes. So GST federally here in Ontario, HST is something that's charged on new home construction. That's probably one of the big things that are mentioned in both the two party platforms in terms of the Conservatives and the Liberals.
Yeah. So I have my opinion, and I'm going to ask you first for yours. What do you think? Do you think this is actually going to make new homes, whether it's for, Liberals with the first-time homes or first-time home buyers, Conservatives for everybody? Do you think that it's actually going to make homes more affordable?
So I think there's markets where this is definitely going to help, right? But honestly, I don't think that you're going to see builders lowering the prices of new construction homes just because that tax has been removed. I think people, consumers are used to paying now a high price for new construction. Maybe it'll come down a little bit, but it's not going to be the full amount of that tax amount that is now apparently going to be off the table for both those constructions. I think, whether you limit it to, first-time home buyers or everybody, I don't think really makes a difference necessarily. I just think the 1 million, 1.3 million, it's out of most people's price ranges anyway. So in our market, certainly, I don't think it's going to make a difference. And I would be skeptical whether builders are going to pass that savings on. What do you think?
So it's interesting. I think it's going to help. I do think it's going to help, especially if it's for everybody. Obviously, first-time home buyers in Sudbury typically aren't spending $1 million anyways.
No.
Unless they're doing like a multi-generational house, and then it's different. But let's just keep it as single family. I don't think it's going to help single family or first-time home buyers. I think it will help if it's for everybody and it's up to the 1.3, only because those people that are moving up have families. They probably have, multiple streams of income and can afford it more. The one question mark that I would raise would be, are builders actually going to lower the price of houses? I think it should somehow, and I mean, it doesn't give them, like, it's not in their pocket anyways. So something listed at $999 you should see $950 now, and that would entice more people, especially with a price decrease. I think people are going to see that and be like, okay, let's jump back in. Maybe they couldn't afford, 1.1 million, but now they can afford $1 million.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't think it's necessarily going to increase the supply side of things. And I think that's the bigger problem here. So we don't have enough housing that meets people's needs. Yep. So sure, if you're going to go build a beautiful $1 million or $1.3 million home and it's your next home, maybe your $650,000 home will then go on the market. But you're getting a 1-to-1. You're not getting that increase in housing supply that we're really looking for.
Yeah.
So I think, sure, it's good, but is it going to change things? Probably not really.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Fair.
Okay. So the NDP, talk about increasing supply. The NDP wants to build 1.5 million affordable homes over the next 10 years. And they also are taking the initiative to say they want to limit corporate ownership of rental housing. So that's a big thing. And I don't think we see it in a lot of platforms. Perhaps the Greens have it in there as well, but limiting the corporate ownership and the increase of supply. So how significant are these plans for prospective home buyers and renters here in Canada?
I mean, I think especially for the $1.5 million affordable homes, I think that's what everybody wants, whether you're in government or running for government or, you're just the consumer. We want to see more affordable homes. And just going back to the old point, like the $1 million house that, these builders are building, especially in and around Sudbury where we work, they're huge. They're 4,000 square feet. They're, beautiful houses and not necessarily what everybody needs right now. So I think obviously it's a good plan. The Liberals said this, 2 years ago throughout COVID as well. We need more houses, and they had a big plan, and it never came to fruition. You could see from the stats that the majority of, I'm going to say, properties that are being built are fourplex properties or multi-family properties. The single family houses are kind of becoming a thing of the past. It's not affordable to build them anymore. So I think that's what we're really going to have to focus on in the next couple of years, is how to make building single family homes affordable. And I mean, if we go the other direction, maybe we don't build single family houses, but you're going to have to live in a fourplex with 3 other families, right? The corporation part of it, I think, is more of a United States issue. Obviously, that Tricon in the southern states that owns 38,000 houses, and they're backed by, all these huge companies that have billions of dollars, and they're just eating up people's homes. I don't think that's right. I think we definitely need a cap on the amount of houses, especially single family, that they can own. You want to build, or you want to buy, 100 unit apartment building, go for it. A commercial plaza, go for it. But I think we should definitely limit how many. I don't know what that limit is.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
so hard to say. I think, we talked about this at the office today as well. And single family homes are kind of that sort of protected little niche, right? And I think we see it in other markets where developers are buying up single family lots and developing multifamily there, right? So creating 3 to 4 housing units out of one. I think that's a good thing. And if it has to be a corporation that does that, then so be it, right? A lot of people, individual, investors don't have the capital or the knowledge to do that type of development. But when you're talking about corporations who are buying single family homes and just becoming a corporate landlord, I don't necessarily think that's right. I think it's kind of taking that personal side of things away. Maybe a couple of homes can be owned by a corporation, maybe a small corporation, but you see these things. I mean, we saw it here in the North. We saw it in the North just the last couple of years throughout COVID. We saw a large corporation or several corporations with these funny names buying up properties and then remarketing them, remortgaging them over their value, over leveraging. And then, we saw that whole thing implode, which was terrible. And the majority of those renters are left with homes, some apartments that are not being cared for because the investor's gone, belly up. So I think that's a real concern when you have corporate ownership, when you have, people like me and you and other people that we know in our circle who own buildings and who are those sort of hands-on landlords. They care about their tenants. They're going to do the right thing. They're going to fix the places as needed. So yeah, I agree that sort of the corporate ownership needs some kind of limitation, but it's hard to say exactly what that should be.
And I turn that back and I look at myself, and I own, a few properties now, and it's like, what's the limit where like I have to stop buying properties? Like, what if I get to 20 properties and they say, okay, you can't own anymore? Where do I pivot to? Or if that limit's 100, it's just like, I'm not sure.
You're not going to buy 100 properties.
I don't know. You never know. We'll work on that. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. There should be a limit. What the limit is,
it's hard to say.
Yeah, we could talk about that a whole other episode or 4. Okay, so the Liberals plan, they want to double new home construction with their Build Canada Homes initiative. What are your thoughts on that?
So I really like this idea and this plan. I mean, there's so many good nuggets here in every single platform about building properties and building affordable homes. You and I, we had the privilege when we were both on the real estate board, we went to Ottawa as part of the big initiative to lobby Parliament Hill on matters of housing and affordable housing. And I remember one of those key initiatives that we were bringing forward to them was the idea of a national housing roundtable. And the idea of that was to have, a multitude of professionals across the country who are skilled and knowledgeable in building homes, new home initiatives, sustainable homes, Indigenous housing needs, and to have all of those people help consult on building homes nationally. Anyway, that hasn't happened, but I thought it was a great idea. And I think I take nuggets from this Build Canada Homes program. I say, you know what, it is a lot like that initiative or that idea. So the idea is for the federal government to establish a federal housing developer. So for the federal government to get into building housing, building affordable homes on public lands. And I think a lot of the things that I took away from it also was the need for innovative construction and more modular homes as a way of building faster, building better quality homes, certainly, because you're not in that sort of temperature environment. Building faster and more sustainable homes. So they're looking at innovative construction ideas as part of it, building on public lands and becoming a developer of housing, I think is excellent. They're looking at, cost cutting municipal development charges in half. And that's probably one of the biggest things that we see, right? We talk about reducing red tape. Yes, let's get those permits going faster, but also why does it need to be so high to develop a single unit or 3 units on a housing project? So lowering those development costs for multi-unit residential housing.
And there was a report that came out, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, that said between 30 and 40% of all new construction is red tape. Red tape based, whether it, HST, development charges, it goes on and on. So for the people that are harping on people to build more homes, and it just makes it
It's
so
very expensive.
unaffordable.
Just to get a shovel in the ground is so expensive. And I was even listening to podcasts, I think just yesterday, it was more geared towards like the greater Vancouver area and Burnaby and sort of how they've developed their lands. And they were saying it's $80,000 per unit before you even get a shovel in the ground, just for the permitting and the red tape involved. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay. So next, the Conservatives want to unlock 15% of federal lands and buildings. We talked about that earlier, for housing. And they're talking about rewarding municipalities. So that's kind of a different take on things. Rather than punishing municipalities for not building, they're looking at rewarding municipalities for cutting that red tape. So do you think this could help accelerate the development?
I mean, it definitely could. I was doing the research for this podcast, and I went on, the federal government website, and they have a map of all federal lands, and they're remote, like they're outside of cities. They're the only one that's close to Sudbury that could be maybe developed is down by Burwash. So it's, half an hour, 45 minutes from the actual city. Even going to North Bay, they have actually a big chunk, but it's, west of the city and north a little bit, so it's out. And so like to get all of the services that you need out to those locations, it
would be not cost effective, I imagine.
Yeah, so what I think of is like, federal buildings, I guess downtown Sudbury, or I'm thinking like the CRA. Obviously, they're not going to get rid of those, but it's like those are the buildings that you'd have to sell off and deconstruct to be able to build something on.
I don't think they're ever getting rid of a CRA.
Absolutely not, especially the one in Sudbury.
Makes so much money.
So yeah, like it's good unlocking, 15% or selling off 15% of buildings sounds good. I don't think, unless there's other provinces that it kind of works in. I'm kind of Ontario specific here, but there's like really not that much. And the land that is federally owned, the beautiful land, are often national parks.
Yeah, we got to keep that land for public use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think the incentive to remove the red tape is one of the things we've been talking about for so long, right? So if municipalities have an incentive to start making it simpler. And, we looked at other jurisdictions, and I think we've talked about a lot of different podcasts that we listen to, right? I think it's great to understand our local market, but it's also important to understand what's happening around Canada and where things are successful. And some of the successful developments in the municipalities that have really accelerated their housing starts have benefited from streamlining that process, automating even the building permit process. So all online, you can start building the next day. Removing setback requirements or decreasing the setback requirements and making it so that, okay, you have a lot that is 40 by 100. This is what you can do with it. These are the units you can build.
The catalog that they came out with, was that maybe 2 months ago now?
CMHC.
Yeah,
I think that's
catalog
next on our list.
Is that next on our list? Like, I think that's phenomenal. Yeah. You have, a 50 by 100 lot in Sudbury. These are the 5 houses that you could build, or the 5 duplexes, or the 5 fourplexes. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. You're just like, okay, this is what I want to build. Let's go.
Yeah. So to backtrack a little bit on what we're talking about, CMHC has, and they've done this in the past too. Did I send you the one from the 60s? So my house is on there in like the 60s, 70s. So CMHC releases these sort of like small scale building ideas for individual homeowners. So these are homes that can be fast tracked depending on which province you're in. They have a design build for each province because each province has different building guidelines and whatnot. And then in addition to these homes that can be built, they have multifamily plans and they have ADUs, so accessory dwelling unit plans that can be sort of fast tracked in your individual jurisdiction. So, I think we were both pretty excited when we looked at those designs. They're quite cool. Do you think this is one of those things that people could use to help streamline the permitting process?
Absolutely. I think like this was actually a fantastic idea by the government, actually by, I guess, CMHC, but I think it's great. And I mean, the people that want to build other homes, okay, that's fantastic. You got to go through the permitting process. You got to, do your planning, do all the other things. But the people that are just wanting to put more homes in the ground, I think this is I think it's a fantastic idea for sure.
I love the idea of accessory dwelling units and increase in densification, certainly in the city core and where you have the services. I think that's really important. And it's definitely something maybe we haven't considered in our primary residence, but in other properties that we own, I think would be a great idea. But I don't think the government can and should rely on individual property owners to develop their own lands, right? I think it's a great tool for individuals to be able to use, but on the large scale, it's not necessarily going to help. And we've looked at other jurisdictions. So what's kind of interesting, we've seen in British Columbia, I'm going to reference BC a lot, unfortunately, in this podcast, but what we've seen there with the accessory dwelling units being added and with people sort of adding onto their individual lands, as they often will allow for the stratification of that land as well. So let's say you have a 40 by 100 foot lot and you have a home that's, close to the frontage of the road, and you can almost build a whole second house on that lot. Maybe they're semi-detached. They would allow for, you could stratify the land so it's like a condo corporation, only to condo owners, but individual ownership, so that then you could sell that piece of land. And we had looked at a property in Victoria that had this beautiful 1930s home and a kind of a weird 1990s build on the back. And the family had built it so that they could give one side to one son and the other side to the other.
So you can sell off like half of the lot
they were
as
individual,
a condo. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, but that's a limitation. And I was listening to this podcast again, this other podcast, for people who had built the laneway homes in Toronto. That became and has become quite a important development. But what people are finding sometimes in Toronto is, they're not going to necessarily get the money back that they spend. If they spend $400,000 or $500,000 building a beautiful laneway home, they may actually be not recouping that full cost when they go to sell the property in its entirety.
Interesting.
Yeah, because then guess what? You have no yard. You have another house in the backyard, but it's not always something that people want. But if you have a stratification allowance where that carriage house or that back alley house can become its own unit, then you could sell it off as a smaller home that maybe meets the needs of a first-time home buyer or somebody who's downsizing, and you're basically splitting the property. So I think there's a little bit of limitations with that. I think it's great, but also maybe we could do more. Yeah.
My opinion on that would be, it really depends. And at that point, it becomes like an investment strategy when you have multiple homes. So I think I would definitely look at doing it with one of my, properties, like investment properties, add in another unit. But my personal opinion would be I wouldn't do it at like my residence,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, we have gone through a lot of different strategies that are in everybody's individual platforms. How do you think the party promises could actually play out in markets like ours here in Sudbury and in Northern Ontario?
Well, opposite to you, I think the GST off of new homes, I think it will help a certain demographic. And the people that are moving into those larger homes obviously are selling probably smaller homes, I would assume. So that would help out the actual first-time home buyers or what they can't afford. So I think that's pretty good. One thing that we haven't talked about yet is the Conservatives' plan for redevelopment, which would be exempting people. It's kind of like the 1031 exchange in the States, but exempting the capital gains if those dollars are reinvested. And I think, honestly, that is the top moneymaker in all of the platforms. Not to say the rest of the Conservatives' platform is fantastic, but that one piece would be huge for redevelopment. It would be huge for, mom and pop investors that don't want to cash out because the capital gains are going to hit hard. And I think it would help. I think they said something like it would free up $12 billion worth of redevelopment, and that's for corporations and personal as well. But I think that out of everything, I think that is the number one piece that they came out with, which I think might help them. But
yeah, that's a really good point too, because I hadn't really discussed that much, but I do think that sort of allocation of kind of deferring your capital gains by reinvesting in another property or another investment in Canada, it's huge for small sort of landlords, small landlords that own a couple of buildings, right? If you have to pay a capital gains tax every time you sell to then, do something else and maybe buy a bigger property or maybe invest in your own business where you're going to have employees, there's always a limitation on that if you're going to be faced with a capital gains tax. So I love that idea. Honestly, I think it's a great idea, and it might actually free up some of those smaller investment properties. If someone has a little duplex or triplex and they want to then go, maybe start a business or do something else with their investment, it's going to open up that unit for somebody else.
And I feel like a lot of first-time home buyers, especially these days, are looking for, a little bit of a mortgage helper. So, I mean, buying a duplex would be a good idea. And those, the smallish landlords that have, let's say, 3 duplexes instead of one big building, they're like, okay, we're going to sell 1 duplex this year, 1 next year, and 1 the year after.
They stagger it because of that capital gains.
That's right. So if they could sell all 3, buy a bigger building, reinvest, the capital that they have, that would allow 3 duplexes right now to hit the market, which will probably get eaten up by either smaller investors, maybe it's a first time investing, or first time home buyers.
First time home buyer. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we always talk about house hacking and how that's a great first time home buyer strategy.
Yeah. So I think this will help that section. I'm not sold on the conservatives, selling off 15% of their federal buildings and stuff like that, but this one is the trump card for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so one final question to kind of close up this conversation. Let's say you're a voter who's passionate about housing and housing affordability. What should you be looking at when reviewing these platforms?
Well, I think it's great to look at all the ideas and the promises that they're making, but it's also important to look at how do they plan on implementing these promises, right? What is the way that they're going to go about making housing affordable, increasing our housing supply, and addressing some of the key concerns that you might have. I think it's important to look at, will that apply to our local reality? So if you're in small town Ontario, if you're in Northern Ontario, is the $1 million, exemption on GST on your new construction going to help you? Maybe not, in my opinion. Or maybe it will. And then look at not just the short term, but the long-term affordability and the long term of this plan, because, we're not going to see a huge change in 1 year, 2 year, 4 years. It's probably going to be 5 to 10 years down the road before we have the amount of housing that we need today. So I say look at the long term. Yeah. So if you're a voter in this election, what recommendations do you have, Tyler?
I think they're the same as every year, really. Like, you need to get informed. You can't rely on social media because it's just slander all over the place. So actually get informed, go out and, have a conversation. Have a conversation with other people that you like and trust. Have a conversation with the people that are actually running in your municipalities. Go out to, the debates and just get involved. And it's more than just looking at social media. Go and read the actual policies and look at track record. Look at what everybody's doing. Not that any platform has a fantastic track record, but I mean, it's just about getting informed. And I guess my next thing would be it really affects, especially this housing piece, affects everybody. Mm-hmm. It affects renters, it affects owners, it affects tenants and landlords. So you really have to see what side you're on currently, what side you want to be on. And it's really just about getting out, being informed, and actually voting. Yeah.
Actually voting. I think that's the key. So, we try to keep our opinions certainly out of this. We look at everything in terms of our insight as realtors, but I think the most important thing is that, people who listen to this podcast and people who are out there get out and make their decision and actively vote.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning into the TNT podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to leave us a comment, subscribe, and share with a friend who might be interested in real estate.
We'll catch you next time, and until then, stay ahead in real estate.